By the time my husband dropped to one knee, I was already standing close enough to hear him laugh. I had spent the afternoon planning a surprise. A small velvet jewelry box rested in my purse. Nothing extravagant. Just a watch I knew Ryan had admired for months, wrapped with a handwritten note because he always claimed those meant more than expensive gifts. The hostess smiled when I arrived at the rooftop restaurant. "Your party is already here." I thanked her and followed her toward the private dining terrace. It was Valentine's Day. Our reservation was for 7:30 p.m. I noticed the flowers first, then the champagne, then Ryan. He wasn't facing me. He was facing Victoria Langford, his CEO. He reached into his jacket, removed a ring box, and lowered himself onto one knee. The applause started before I understood what I was looking at. Someone at a nearby table even whispered, "This is beautiful." Victoria covered her mouth with both hands. Ryan smiled the same smile I'd seen in our wedding photographs 6 years earlier. I didn't stay long enough to hear her answer. There are moments when your mind protects you by becoming strangely practical. I stepped backward before anyone turned around, walked through the restaurant, thanked the hostess on my way out. By the time I reached my car, my phone showed 42 unanswered text messages from Ryan asking where I was. I placed the velvet jewelry box on the passenger seat without opening it again. I started the engine. Neither of them had seen me. Neither of them knew I had already signed something that morning. People later asked whether there had been signs. There always are. The difficult part is recognizing them before they become obvious. Ryan and I had been married for 6 years. In the beginning, ambition was one of the things I admired most about him. He had a habit of making plans on napkins during dinner, talking about where he wanted to be in 5 years, as though success was simply another appointment he intended to keep. Most of the time, he did. 3 promotions arrived faster than either of us expected. Each one brought longer hours, nicer suits, and conversations that drifted further away from home. He became fascinated with rooms full of executives I had never met, with invitations, with titles, with people who could open the next door. I never discouraged him. I also never talked much about my own work. I was a corporate attorney, but confidentiality was part of the profession. Ryan liked to joke that I was just another lawyer, and I never corrected him. It was easier to let him believe my career was quieter than it really was. Then, Victoria Langford entered the picture. Ryan mentioned her often at first. She was brilliant, demanding, the kind of CEO who remembered everyone's name and expected everyone to remember hers. Eventually, he stopped mentioning her altogether. That change caught my attention more than all the earlier conversations combined. Silence has a way of replacing explanation when explanation becomes uncomfortable. Still, I didn't search his phone. I didn't follow him. Trust deserves that much, until it doesn't. Then, 11 days before Valentine's Day, an anonymous message appeared in my inbox. The email arrived at 6:18 on a Monday morning. No subject line, no name. Just 8 photographs attached beneath a single sentence. "You deserve to know before everyone else does." I stared at the screen for a long time before opening the first image. Ryan and Victoria, leaving a hotel together. Another at a restaurant I recognized from one of his supposed client dinners. A third showed them boarding a private company jet. The remaining photographs covered nearly 3 weeks, each stamped with dates and times that fit neatly into meetings and business trips I had never questioned. I closed the laptop. Then, I made coffee. People imagine betrayal creates instant certainty. For me, it created procedure. By 9 o'clock, I had confirmed the hotel reservations through public records, verified travel schedules that matched the company's published events, and accepted that the photographs weren't manufactured. I didn't confront Ryan, not because I was afraid, because accusations come after facts, not before them. Over the next several days, I quietly watched. His explanations became smaller, his business trips became longer. Then, by accident more than intention, I learned about Valentine's Day. A reservation for 2, at a rooftop restaurant. Flowers, ordered in advance. A jeweler's confirmation sent to the wrong email address. It wasn't simply an affair. He was planning something permanent. Oddly enough, that realization brought a kind of calm. The marriage I believed I had was already over. All that remained was deciding how I would leave it. The following morning, I walked into the post office, carrying a sealed envelope I had prepared days earlier. I watched the clerk scan the certified mail tracking number, accepted the receipt, and slipped it into my wallet. Then I drove across town and bought Ryan the Valentine's gift I had planned weeks before. I mailed one envelope before buying Ryan's Valentine's gift. I arrived at the restaurant 7 minutes late. Traffic had been heavier than I expected, and for a brief, foolish moment, I wondered if Ryan was checking his watch, waiting for me to appear with whatever surprise he imagined I'd planned. Instead, he was standing beneath a string of white lights, smiling at another woman. The proposal itself lasted 4 minutes, long enough for champagne to be poured, long enough for nearby diners to stop eating and begin applauding, long enough for me to understand that the anonymous email had only shown me the beginning. Victoria accepted the ring. Ryan stood, kissed her, and someone shouted, "Congratulations!" I never saw either of them notice me. That turned out to be a gift. There was no scene, no raised voices, no dramatic exit. I simply turned around and walked back through the restaurant. The hostess thanked me for coming. I thanked her for her kindness. At exactly 7:46 p.m., I stepped onto the sidewalk with the same small velvet box, still unopened in my purse. By the time I reached home, I placed it in the top drawer of my dresser without looking inside. Some gifts become reminders too quickly. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and dressed for work as though it were any other Friday. At 8:12 a.m., my attorney confirmed that the divorce petition had been officially filed. The paperwork had been prepared before Valentine's Day. The decision had been made before I walked into that restaurant. Seeing Ryan kneel hadn't changed my mind. It had only removed the last remaining doubt. By the time the city was fully awake, my final signature had already mattered. By sunrise, my last signature had already mattered. 3 weeks after Valentine's Day, the company hosted its annual leadership gala. Nearly 180 executives, investors, and board members filled the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished tables, and conversations floated easily between promotions, acquisitions, and quarterly forecasts. I attended because I had already accepted the invitation months earlier. Not as Ryan's wife, as legal counsel. Ryan looked surprised when he saw me across the room. Victoria looked merely confident. Neither of them approached. The evening moved along until Oliver Grant, the chairman of the board, stepped to the podium. He thanked the leadership team, spoke about the pending $2.4 billion merger, and then paused. "There is one person," he said, "whose professionalism deserves recognition." He looked directly toward my table. Claire Donovan. The room turned. Oliver explained that I had voluntarily disclosed a potential conflict of interest before the merger review was completed and had removed myself from the legal team to protect the integrity of the process. He called it an example of ethical leadership. I simply nodded. There was nothing else to do. Then he added one final sentence. The board unanimously accepted her recommendations before her resignation from the matter. Victoria's expression changed first, not dramatically, just enough. She understood exactly what that meant. The merger review had already been completed, under procedures I had helped establish. My resignation protected the process, but it also meant no one, including her, could quietly revisit the legal concerns I had documented. Ryan finally looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, perspective. For years, he had assumed he was climbing, while I stood quietly behind him. Only then did he realize I had been walking an entirely different path. Ryan finally understood that I had never been standing behind him. The divorce was finalized 97 days after I filed. There were no courtroom arguments, no public accusations. One signed settlement, 2 attorneys, and a judge who wished us both well before moving on to the next case. Some endings are quieter than the years that lead to them. Ryan called 12 times after the papers were signed. I let each call go to voicemail. His messages changed over time. The first asked for an explanation, as though one was still owed. The next few asked for another conversation. The last one simply said, "I'm sorry." Weeks later, we met for coffee. Not to begin again, to finish honestly. He looked older than he had that Valentine's Day, though only a few months had passed. "I thought success would solve everything," he said. I believed him, not because it excused what he had done, because people often chase the wrong prize, with complete sincerity. I hurt you, he said quietly. Yes. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. There wasn't much else to say. I wished him well, and I meant it. Resentment would have tied my future to his choices, longer than I was willing to allow. When I left the cafe, I drove home to the small house I had purchased on my own, years earlier. Spring had finally arrived. The rose bushes along the garden path had begun to bloom after weeks of careful pruning. I carried the unopened Valentine's gift from my closet to the garage. I didn't throw it away. Some reminders deserved to become history instead of bitterness. As I stood in the garden that evening, I realized the flowers had kept their promise, even when people had not. The roses I had carried that Valentine's night finally bloomed the following spring, in a garden outside the home that belonged only to me.